ladies, and welcome back to our study of the Russian Revolution. So at last we have arrived. We have arrived at the October Revolution of 1917, the culmination of all that the Bolsheviks and Lenin had been trying to achieve for the last, going back right to 1902, 1903, when the Bolshevik Party was actually formed. So this video is going to be devoted to the October Revolution and the significance of the October Revolution. And there are lots of key points here which we'll be looking at. So sit back, relax and enjoy. Now, first up, let's have a look. When we're looking at the October Revolution, obviously Lenin and the Bolsheviks play a key role, and what we've learned in our previous study of both the 1905 and February 1917 revolutions, Lenin and the Bolsheviks played very little role in either of those revolutions, except for Trotsky, who wasn't, except for Trotsky in the 1905 revolution, who wasn't even a Bolshevik at that time. But apart from him, these Bolsheviks had done very little in the revolutions that had occurred prior to October 1917. But it's in October 1917 when they really come to the fore, and it is Lenin who plays a very significant role. Historians debate how significant, but and we'll look at these points now. But without him, there is no doubt there would not have been a revolution itself.
What are you going on about, Comrade Bickham? Of course the Bolsheviks played a key role in February 1917. Trotsky himself says the Bolsheviks agitated amongst the workers, inspired them to rise up and overthrow the Tsarist regime. Don't be a part-time revolutionary, Comrade Bickham. Don't be a Menshevik.
Oh, you make a strong point, Comrade Jason, and Comrade Trotsky always presents very strong arguments, but I want to hear somebody else's opinion about how significant the Bolsheviks were during the February 1917 revolution. Let's hear what Comrade Fernando has to say.
I agree with Comrade Jason. Don't be a Menshevik, Comrade Bickham.
All right, so let's have a look. Let's look at our first point and just get a bit of a timeline of events here. So if you think back to the Kornilov affair, and actually even going back further, we go back to the July days when Lenin, after the July days, Lenin fled from Russia and he fled to Finland, and he stayed there right up past the Kornilov affair. So he was outside of Russia during that. He might have sort of zipped in, zipped out, but he stays outside of Russia. And he only comes back here. Have a look at our first point here. He only returns to Russia on the 7th of October Okay, and as he did in the past, he was trying to persuade the Bolshevik Central Committee to perform certain actions in order to start this revolution against the provisional government, to no avail. But he comes back on the 7th of October, and then there is, we can see here, a Bolshevik Central Committee meeting is held.
Trotsky.
Finally, in the morning, I think it is, of the 10th of October, the Bolshevik Central Committee, under being persuaded by Lenin, Lenin persuades the Bolshevik Central Committee to agree to an insurrection against the provisional government. He gets them to agree to that, but he is unable to get them to actually set an actual date. But he does get them to agree, so that's a huge step forward from his perspective, that the Bolshevik Central Committee now agrees that they are going to try to overthrow the provisional government. And this is something that Lenin had, I remind you, Lenin had written about as the necessity to achieve a proletarian revolution in Russia. And he referred to this in the April Theses, right back in April 1917, okay? And he was totally against the February Revolution because he believed it was just a bourgeois capitalist revolution, put bourgeois capitalists into power, i.e. the deputies of the provisional government, the ministers, sorry. And he didn't believe that was a true revolution, and which he referred to in the April Theses as the second stage of the revolution, the true revolution, needed to be achieved, the workers' revolution, which became the October Revolution. So when we're looking at actions of Lenin, this act of him convincing the Bolshevik Central Committee to agree to an overthrow of the provisional government, that is on the 10th of October, that is a key act of his. Okay. Next, another key point, which sets up the ground, the foundation for the October Revolution. Trotsky is elected to the chairmanship of the Petrograd Soviet on the 25th of September, and this gave the Bolsheviks a majority in and control over the Soviets. So this is when the Bolsheviks got their majority within the Petrograd Soviet. They also had, by this stage, a majority in the Moscow Soviet too, and Trotsky is elected chairman of the Petrograd Soviet, And if we remember right back to 1905, when the Petrograd Soviet was first set up, Trotsky was also the chairman then when it first sat. The next key point, and I referred to this a lot in the previous video on the Kornilov affair, but this MRC, so crucial. When the MRC was set up on the 9th of October, I won't go over it too much again, but pretty much the MRC was a subcommittee within the Petrograd Soviet, and it pretty much had authority of authority over the military within the Soviet. And I remind you that the Soviet, I'll remind you about Soviet Order Number 1. Gave authority to the Petrograd Soviet over all the military in Russia, okay, rather than the provisional government. So the provisional government had little control over the military. The military really looked to the rank and file anyway, to the Petrograd Soviet. So the Military Revolutionary Committee had the 5 members, and 3 of them were Bolsheviks. 2 of them were left SRs, but they were just in there to sort of make up the numbers. So the Bolsheviks, Trotsky, and the 2 other Bolsheviks had the majority, and they could direct pretty much as a result, direct the military within Petrograd. The next key point. So this one here, Kamenev and Zinoviev published an article arguing that it would be a mistake to overthrow the provisional government. So this article is released in a Bolshevik newspaper on the 18th of October 1917. So this here gives you an insight into the way the Bolshevik Central Committee worked. Lenin, he was a very persuasive arguer. He had very forceful arguments, but he didn't totally control the Central Committee. So he had to convince the other members of the Central Committee to agree with him. There was voting going on, and if the majority didn't agree with Lenin, then they would vote against his proposals. Two of these, Kamenev and Zinoviev, obviously didn't agree with the decision by the Central Committee, Bolshevik Central Committee, on the 10th of October to stage an insurrection against the provisional government. So they didn't agree with it, and they published their views in this article on the 18th of October, saying that it would be a mistake to overthrow the provisional government. And the reason why they were against trying to overthrow the provisional government was that they were afraid that it would be a failure just like the July days. So they did not want to be put into prison and the Bolshevik Party suffer again. So that was their motivation behind publishing their article, which argued against the insurrection. The funny thing was that Kerensky, so this article then leads to a series of events which ultimately triggers the October Revolution. So Kerensky reads the article and he interprets it here. So the point here, Kerensky interprets this as proof that a date has been set to overthrow the provisional government. So Kamenev and Zinoviev, they write their article, "We do not want to overthrow the provisional government, we think it's a mistake." Kerensky reads this article and he comes to the conclusion, hey, hold on, the Bolsheviks are going to overthrow the provisional government and me as Prime Minister. I can't have that happen. So what he does is he then closes down Pravda and Izvestchaya, two Bolshevik newspapers, on the 23rd of October. And then he attempts to arrest Bolshevik leaders. And this is the trigger event. This is the immediate cause of the October Revolution. It is the justification Lenin needs to then start the insurrection against the provisional government. Once Kerensky acts again, tries to overthrow or arrest Bolshevik leaders, tries to suppress the party, Bolshevik leaders such as Kamenev, Zinoviev, all the others have no other choice now but to try and overthrow the provisional government. And they begin the insurrection. So I'll just move down here a little bit. Just going down, down, down. Okay. Now, so we get to here. So Kerensky tries to close down the newspapers and tries to arrest Bolshevik leaders on the 23rd of October. And then Lenin unleashes Trotsky, who is both the chairman of the Petrograd Soviet by this stage and one of the key members on the Military Revolutionary Committee. And through his power, he uses the soldiers, which the Petrograd Soviet controls, to overthrow the provisional government. So the Kronstadt sailors, they sail from the Kronstadt naval base to Petrograd, and they come in and they, with their ships, they line up their target, the Winter Palace, with their guns, although I don't think they actually blow up the Winter Palace, but they do target and threaten the Winter Palace. And then the Red Guards, those worker militias, which are loyal to the Soviets and many to the Bolsheviks, then seize key points throughout Petrograd, and then also storm the Winter Palace. And that's what you have up here, this very famous painting, the storming of the Winter Palace. It seems very heroic and so forth, but there's very this is a bit of a revision of history here, because it didn't really happen like that. In a similar way to what happened with the Tsar in February 1917, there was very little resistance to the toppling of the provisional government amongst the Russian people, because the provisional government in October 1917, like the Tsar in February 1917, both were unable to resolve the problems facing the Russian people of peace, bread and land. Okay, the provisional government had not solved those. The war was still going. Food rationing had become worse. Land seizures by peasants had only become more of those that occurred. None of the issues had been solved, and when the provisional government was finally toppled by the Bolsheviks and in the name of the Petrograd Soviet, there was very little protest or angst amongst the Russian people. They were fatigued, I think, by all of the change, by the revolutionary change, by the war itself, and they just accepted it. So Trotsky organised the insurrection. It began on the 24th of October and is completed on the 26th of October. And a total number of, I believe there were only 6 deaths, according to Lynch. There were only 6 deaths during the whole episode. And he states these were probably all Red Guards, most probably accidentally shot by their own side. The simple fact was that the provisional government had hardly any military forces on which to call. And so they fell. And Kerensky fled, he got out of Russia. And then the Bolsheviks, in the name of the Petrograd Soviet, took over power. In the eyes of the people, from the perspective of the Russian people, we need to understand too that it was the Petrograd Soviet that was now in power. It was the Petrograd Soviet that had overthrown the provisional government, not the Bolsheviks. And all of the posters that were released, all the propaganda that was released at the time, stated that it was the Petrograd Soviet was now in power, not the Bolshevik Party. It was only those revolutionaries in the know who realised who was pulling the strings, and Lenin was there controlling all of it through his control and the Bolsheviks' control over the Petrograd Soviet. And I remind you, if you go right back to the April Theses, this is what Lenin spelt out as the way for the Bolsheviks to get into power. He stated that in order for the Bolsheviks to control Russia, in order for a proletarian revolution to occur in Russia, the Bolsheviks had to infiltrate the Soviets and then gain power through that channel. And that is what they did. And they did it because of and all historians agree with this, the Bolsheviks, out of all the revolutionary parties in Russia, the Mensheviks, social revolutionaries, various different groups, the Bolsheviks, the liberals, the Bolsheviks were the most highly organised and disciplined of all the revolutionary parties. And that was one of the keys to their success.
Yes, this is awesome. I knew the revolution was inevitable.